Shalom and welcome to the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Today we're looking at Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 25. You may recall from our previous verse that we were looking at the siege of Jerusalem as Jeremiah saw it in a prophetic vision, and we were actually hearing what the people were saying in their panic, in their anguish, as they realized that their city was about to be taken by the Babylonians and to be destroyed. Here we're going to continue that same sort of a vision as though someone is addressing the city itself. So it's a rather dramatic statement. Let's go ahead and read it in Hebrew as we get started. Al tetzei hasade, uvaderek al teliki, ki cherev leoyev, magor mizabib. So we start with this al. This is our negation. Remember, it's sort of the negation that we use for imperatives, especially for more direct imperatives. And so even though this is sort of the equivalent of lo, it's a little more direct and immediate. And do not, and what is it you're not supposed to do? Well, let's look at this one here. Now, by the form, this would be an imperfect, but it's with the negative, it's actually going to be used as sort of adjussive. It's the equivalent, we would call it the equivalent of a negative imperative, but it's actually adjussive. And let's see, we have a performative, we have a tau at the beginning, and we have an e at the end. So this is going to be adjussive. This is going to be a 2fs adjussive, like I said, being used as an imperative. And this is a cow, and it's from our verb yatsa, which means to go out, to leave, to go forth. Now, the yod disappears in this verb here, and we get this little lengthening of the hirek into a full say right here. Now, you notice we have this e sufformative, which tells us we have a 2fs. If you're using a critical edition of the Old Testament, you may notice that there is a karei reading. This is the ketiv. This is what is written with the hirek yod. There is a karei reading of what is read that has at the end has a shurek, u, in which case it would be a 2mp. So do not go out. So it would be referring to the people, masculine plural. Don't go out. The 2fs works very well because it's and I think we can keep the ketiv reading as it is because it's referring to the city personified as a woman. And we're actually going to see in the next verse, O daughter of Zion. So Jeremiah is addressing the city, so keeping it as a woman. So a 2fs is perfectly proper, although we can understand why perhaps the Masoretes may have put a 2mp instead. So, but let's leave it as it is. So do not go out, and then literally the field. You can see your article here, the field. Now, we're looking for a preposition in our thinking. Hebrew normally would have a preposition, but it doesn't always need to, especially with a verb of motion, which already implies a certain direction. So don't go out into, we would say, or toward the field. And in the way, now what do we have here? There's just and, usually just with a schwa, but remember when that comes before a bait or a couple of the letters as well, we get a shurek instead. And then we have the article here with the pathak and the doubling right here. In the way, or in the road, do not, exactly what we had here, adjussive with a negation, so it's being used as the equivalent of a negative imperative. And this is a 2fs as well, cow, and this time it's from the verb halak, which is kind of a funny verb. The hay drops off and lengthens, sort of like yatsa did over here. Same sort of a vowel pattern as well. And this also has a karei reading with a shurek as a possibility, but again, I think we can keep it with this hirek yod as a 2fs, cow as well. So it's to walk, and don't walk, and in the way or in the road, don't walk. In other words, don't go outside. You don't want to leave the protection of the city, although that's not going to be much protection for very long. And why shouldn't you go outside? Because here's our reason, sword. That's our famous word for sword, for a oyev, and oyev, it's a participle, but it's regularly used as a substantive noun, and that's the word for enemy. Sword for the enemy, or literally an enemy, or we would probably say the enemy in English, even though you don't specifically have the article here. It's pretty clear in the context. The enemy has, that's our verb, that's how we express the verb, to have something. A sword is to somebody. The enemy has a sword. And then magor mizabib. Now this is an expression. Magor by itself means fear or terror or dread or horror, something like that. It's a very scary word. Dread or terror from, here's our preposition min, and the nun is assimilated into that dagesh in the samek, and then sabib, which is actually a substantive, but usually used as an adverb from sabah, meaning to go around. So mitsabib means from all around us, terror on every side, sometimes translated. Now this little expression here is going to be something quite unique. Well, not totally, but very typical of Jeremiah. It's going to show up a number of times in the book of Jeremiah and Lamentations as well. You'll see it especially in chapter 20 of Jeremiah. But this is the first time we see it in the book of Jeremiah here. Terror on every side. It's actually almost going to become a nickname for Jeremiah a little bit later on as the people mock him for saying this so often. Well, pretty straightforward as it is, but it's, again, a very dramatic text. Let's go ahead and hide our work here and look briefly at just a couple translations. There's not a lot of variation among the major translations. Go not out into the field, nor walk on the road. Okay, pretty straightforward. For the enemy has a sword. Terror is on every side. So the ESV translates it pretty straightforward. The Net Bible, which tends to go more of a paraphrase in Jeremiah here, do not go out into the countryside for field. Do not travel on the roads. Well, it's literally don't walk, travel. Okay, on the roads. It's just the road here, but they've extended it out, giving a good idea, developing the idea correctly. For the enemy is there with sword in hand. Now that's clearly a development. Literally, all we have is for the enemy has a sword to the enemy. But this is the idea. The enemy is there with sword in hand. They are spreading terror everywhere, terror on every side. You don't have they are spreading, but that is certainly the idea. So not a translation, but much more of a paraphrase, but very accurate one. And then if we want to go to probably our most extreme paraphrase with Eugene Peterson's message, we're leaving the actual textual translation now, but he's still getting the idea pretty well. Don't dare go outdoors. Don't leave the house. Don't go into the road. Again, we've moved quite away from translation into paraphrase, but he's certainly got the right idea. Death is on the prowl. Very frequently, sword is one of the equivalents of death because it's bringing death. Death is on the prowl. Danger everywhere. So a pretty good expression of what's happening there. The situation is very bleak. It's very dire. It's very terrifying. Don't forget that as Jeremiah is saying this, it's still future. So please, as Jeremiah would plead with his people, heed God's warning. When God warns his people, it's for a reason. He's not playing around. He's not making false threats. This is going to happen. Unfortunately, to the people, it will. Jeremiah does have more to say to us, so check back with us as we continue working through chapter 6 in the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Shalom.